It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway, a group of friends escaping the noise of the city for some peace in the woods. We planned everything. Josh was in charge of food, and Emily had the map. I, Nick, was the one who suggested the location, a remote cabin in the middle of nowhere, perfect for hiking and disconnecting from our busy lives. But I'll tell you right now, that decision would haunt me forever. The cabin was old, yet charming. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just the forest surrounding us, stretching for miles. At first it was refreshing. We unpacked, laughed, made plans for the hikes we'd take. But as the first night fell, there was something about the stillness of the woods that felt unnatural, too quiet, like the forest was holding its breath, watching us. That night something happened that none of us can explain. Around 2 a.m., Emily woke us all up, terrified. She swore she heard footsteps outside the cabin, circling it. Josh brushed it off, saying it was probably an animal, maybe a deer. But when we listened closely, it didn't sound like an animal at all. It was slow, deliberate, heavy. I peeked out of the window, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond a few feet. There was no movement, just the shadow of the trees swaying in the wind. But then, there was a noise, a scratching at the door. My heart stopped. Josh, being the brave one, grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, shining it into the woods. Nothing. Just an empty, eerie silence. He turned back, chuckling nervously. See? Nothing out there. But just as he turned, we all heard it. A whisper, a faint, low voice, coming from deep within the forest. It said one word: run. We froze. The voice was unmistakable, though none of us could pinpoint where it came from. Emily grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. Nick, what was that? Josh slammed the door shut, locking it. We sat there, wide-eyed and scared, but eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and we managed to sleep, though it was a restless night. The next morning, the woods felt different, darker. The sun barely pierced through the thick canopy, casting strange, twisted shadows on the ground. Emily suggested we leave early, but we laughed it off, convincing ourselves it was all in our heads. But that afternoon, during a hike deeper into the forest, we found something chilling. A clearing, with strange symbols carved into the trees, symbols none of us recognized. Josh, always the skeptic, joked about it being some prank left by teenagers. But deep down, we all knew something was wrong. Very wrong. Then we saw it, far off in the distance. A figure, barely visible through the trees, watching us. Josh shouted at it, but it didn't move, just stood there, motionless. My stomach dropped. I could feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck. When we turned around to leave, we realized something horrifying. The path we came from was gone. We were trapped. No matter where we walked, we kept circling back to the clearing with those strange symbols. Panic set in. Emily started crying, and even Josh was beginning to lose his cool. The sun was starting to set, and the forest became even darker, even more menacing. Then the whispers returned, louder this time, coming from every direction. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was many, all whispering the same thing: run. But from what? We couldn't see anything, yet we could feel it. Something, or someone, was hunting us. Night fell again, and we had no choice but to stay in the clearing. We built a fire, trying to keep whatever was out there at bay. Josh kept saying, "There's nothing out here. It's all in our heads." But then we saw it. Those same footsteps Emily heard the first night, circling us. Slow, heavy. The sound of twigs snapping under something large. "Who's there?" Josh shouted, his voice trembling now. But there was no response, just the footsteps getting closer. And then, we saw it. A shadowy figure standing just at the edge of the firelight, watching us with glowing eyes. Not human, not animal. It stepped forward, and that's when the terror became real. Can you guess what's stalking them in the woods? Let me know in the comments what you think is out there. And by the way, Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. The figure moved closer, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness, reflecting the light of the fire. Emily screamed, and Josh grabbed a large branch, brandishing it like a weapon. But deep down, we knew it wouldn't help. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't something you could just hit or scare away. For a moment, the figure stopped, just stood there, watching. Its heavy breathing echoed in the silent night, each exhale deep and guttural. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, as if it was trying to escape my body. And then it spoke. Not in words we could understand, but in a language that sounded ancient, wrong. The whispers we had heard earlier suddenly grew louder, as if they were all around us, circling us just like the footsteps had. Emily was sobbing uncontrollably now, her voice a mixture of fear and despair. Josh yelled, "Leave us alone," and swung the branch. But as soon as he stepped forward, the figure disappeared, dissolving into the shadows as if it was never there. The whispers stopped. The woods fell silent once more, but the air felt thick with dread. "We need to get out of here. Now," I said, my voice barely a whisper. But there was nowhere to go. Every direction led us back to the same clearing, and now we weren't sure if that figure was the only thing watching us. Desperation began to take over. We ran, crashing through the trees, ignoring the branches that scratched at our faces and arms. We didn't care about the direction anymore. Anything was better than standing still. But the further we ran, the more the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees grew denser, the shadows darker, and the air colder. At one point, Emily collapsed to the ground, completely exhausted. I can't do this anymore," she cried. Josh knelt beside her, trying to calm her down, but even he was shaking. We were all terrified, lost, and on the verge of giving up. And then we heard it again. The footsteps, closer this time, louder, almost as if whatever was stalking us had grown impatient. "Nick, do you hear that?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, too afraid to speak. We all heard it. The heavy, deliberate steps, now approaching fast. And this time, they weren't alone. Multiple sets of footsteps, coming from every direction, surrounding us. We were trapped. As the footsteps closed in, the whispers started again, louder and more menacing. This time they weren't just telling us to run. They were mocking us, laughing at our fear. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. "Josh, what do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. But he didn't answer. He just stood there, staring into the darkness, frozen in place. Suddenly, a loud, unnatural screech pierced the night, sending shivers down my spine. Emily screamed again, and I grabbed her hand, pulling her up. "We have to move, now!" But before we could take a step, the shadows around us seemed to shift. Shapes moved in the darkness, figures, barely visible, circling us like predators. There was no escape. We were completely surrounded. And then, silence. The footsteps stopped. The whispers vanished. The forest was deathly quiet once again, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something. And that's when it happened. Out of the darkness stepped the figure again, only this time, it wasn't alone. Several more shadowy forms emerged, their glowing eyes watching us with an unsettling intensity. They didn't move. They just stood there, observing us, as if deciding what to do next. Josh took a step back, his face pale with fear. What do you want from us?" he stammered. But the figures didn't respond. Instead, they began to move closer, their shapes becoming more defined in the faint light of the fire. And that's when we realized they weren't human. At least, not anymore. Their faces were twisted, deformed, as if they had once been people, but had become something else, something monstrous. One of them, the leader, I assumed, pointed at me. Its hand, long and bony, extended toward me as it let out a low growl. You are not supposed to be here," it rasped, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "This is our land. You trespassed. Now you will pay the price." I felt my heart stop. This wasn't just about getting lost in the woods. We had stumbled upon something ancient, something evil that had been lying in wait for centuries, and now it had decided to claim us. Emily clung to me, her body trembling with fear. "Nick, what do we do? We have to get out of here." But there was no escape. The creatures were closing in, their eyes glowing brighter, their twisted forms becoming clearer in the firelight. "Why us?" Josh asked, his voice barely a whisper. The leader tilted its head, as if amused by the question. "You chose this. You came here to our domain. Now you belong to us." And with that, the creatures lunged. Do you think they can escape the creatures? Let us know what you would do in this situation in the comments below. The creatures lunged toward us, their twisted forms moving with unnatural speed. Time seemed to slow as they approached. My mind raced, but I had no plan, no idea how to escape. "Run!" I screamed, grabbing Emily's hand and pulling her with me. Josh followed, his footsteps pounding the forest floor behind us. We dashed into the trees, branches whipping at our faces as we sprinted blindly into the darkness. But no matter how fast we ran, the creatures were faster. I could hear them right behind us, those heavy footsteps and guttural growls getting closer by the second. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but stopping wasn't an option, not if we wanted to survive. Then in the distance I saw it, a faint glow, a small clearing. Maybe, just maybe, it could be a way out. "That way!" I shouted, pointing ahead. We reached the clearing, panting and exhausted. But what we found wasn't salvation. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, ancient and covered in strange symbols, the same ones we had seen carved into the trees. It radiated an eerie light, like it had been waiting for us. Josh, breathing heavily, stumbled towards it. This must be the source, the reason we are trapped here." "Josh, don't!" Emily cried, but it was too late. He reached out and touched the altar. The ground trembled, and the air around us grew heavy. The creatures appeared at the edge of the clearing, watching us silently, as if waiting for something. Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder than ever, filling my head with words I couldn't understand. The altar's glow intensified, casting strange shadows on the ground. And then, everything stopped. The creatures, the whispers, the trembling. It all ceased, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. For a brief moment, I thought it was over. But then, Josh screamed. Josh's body convulsed as the glow from the altar enveloped him. His eyes widened in terror, his face twisted in pain. Emily screamed, rushing toward him, but I pulled her back. "Don't! You can't help him!" Josh's scream turned into a choked gasp as the light from the altar seemed to pull something from him. His life, his soul, I didn't know. But whatever it was, it left him a hollow shell, his body collapsing lifelessly to the ground. The creatures stepped forward, their eyes fixed on us. The leader, the one who had spoken before, moved toward the altar, its deformed face breaking into a twisted grin. "The sacrifice has been made," it rasped, its voice cold and menacing. "Now you may leave." Emily collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. "Josh, no, this isn't happening." I stood there, frozen in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Josh was gone, and it was all my fault. I had led us here. I had brought us to this cursed place, but we had no choice. We had to leave, or we would suffer the same fate. The creatures parted, giving us a clear path out of the clearing. But I didn't trust them. I didn't trust anything anymore. Emily was barely able to stand, but I helped her to her feet. and together we stumbled through the forest, back in the direction of the cabin. The forest was still dark and foreboding, but the creatures didn't follow us this time. They had what they wanted. We were free to leave, if we could find our way out. After what felt like hours, we finally saw it. The old cabin, standing eerily silent in the moonlight. It looked different now, sinister, like it had been watching us the whole time. But I didn't care. We were close to safety, to escape. "Come on, Emily. We're almost there," I whispered, though my voice was filled with doubt. Was this really over? Could we really escape? As we reached the cabin, Emily turned to me, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Nick, what if it's not over? What if we're still trapped?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we needed to leave this place and never look back. We stepped inside, grabbed our belongings, and ran to the car parked outside. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, but finally, the engine roared to life. Without another word, I floored the gas pedal, speeding down the narrow, winding road that led out of the woods. The creatures, the whispers, the strange symbols. It was all behind us now, but the terror, the guilt, would stay with me forever. As we drove, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the dark, empty road stretching behind us. I wanted to believe we were safe, that we had escaped whatever evil lurked in those woods. But as we reached the main highway, something strange happened. The car radio, which had been silent the whole trip, suddenly crackled to life. Static filled the car, and then through the noise a familiar voice whispered, "You're still ours." Do you think the curse will follow them forever? Or have they truly escaped? Let us know your theories in the comments below. If you've made it this far into the video, you're definitely one of a kind. It's always the deep thinkers and true horror fans who reach this point. So if you enjoyed the story, and you're still curious about the dark mysteries the world has in store for us, don't forget to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the curse really ended, or is it still out there? And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on more of our terrifying and thrilling stories. Also, share this video with your friends who love a good scare, and let's all experience the horror together. Every like, comment, and share helps us keep going and grow our community of horror lovers. Can't wait to see your thoughts in the comments.